Hey guys, welcome back to Not Your College Life with Lisa Beals. I am your host, Lisa Beals. This is episode number 42. So, Not Your College Life is the podcast all about the mom who's done the college thing herself, like me, sent kids to school, and realized it is not as easy as it should be or used to be. So that's where I come into play. I am the sometimes cheeky, always cheesy Midwestern mom / college administrator here to give you the answers you need so that you can stop sweating that stuff and just focus on getting your student from admissions to graduation so that you can get to the empty nester prize at the end. Okay? So let's jump on in. This week's episode is my journey with my Drew. So my goal for this podcast is not just to give you tips and answers and insights into what the university is today. I also felt it's important for you to get to know me because you don't trust and believe people unless you know them. And so I wanted to give you a little peek behind the scenes, not behind the scenes, but I wanted to give you an insight into my life and what has some of the things that have shaped me into the person I am today. And one of those really influential things in my life that has made me the person I am today is my Drew. And I always talk about my kids and my family, my loved ones, in the possessive. And I shouldn't. It's just a weird thing. I don't know when I started doing it. But my Drew is, he's my youngest. He was my special. He was our third, our little boy. My husband, funny enough, and I don't know if it's atypical, my husband really wanted a little girl first. He wanted his little princess, someone that could just wrap him around his little finger. That was his plan. Girl first. I think because he really adored his niece. And he wanted one of his own. Rue the day, right? So we got our daughter, had another daughter 3 years later. And then number 3 was rolling around and I was ready for a boy. I wanted a boy. I'm the second of 4 and my mom had 3 girls and then her boy. So I was kind of banking on I'm going to have 4 kids if I want to get my boy. So we were very fortunate that number 3 came along and that was our little one. Pretty uneventful pregnancy. Everything was fine. Normal delivery. He came along and I did not have time to get an epidural. Honestly, looking back, this is not a childbirth podcast, but looking back, first one was a failure to progress delivery. So I had to have a C-section with the first one. Second one was a VBAC. And so I did get my epidural with her, and I was able to deliver her without a C-section. Number 3, he came along too fast and it was au naturel. And quite honestly, after experiencing the other 2, I would have to say any moms out there that are still in their childbearing years, if you've not had a kid yet and are open to suggestions, I never thought I'd say this. I would support a natural childbirth. And let me tell you why. I know I'm off on a tangent here, moms. I would say, as awful and painful as it is in the moment, that's the worst of it. You deliver and you've got your little pumpkin in your arms and it just gets better from there. But when I had the cesarean and the VBAC, Lord, stuff gets real after the pain meds wear off. And mama ain't got time for that. I got a little pumpkin I got to worry about. So that's just my 2 cents. Y'all make your own choices. That's my input. So anyway, normal pregnancy, normal delivery, normal well baby checks. No surprises. I was working part-time, going to school. By then, I was working at the university. Until I was ready to have him. I had my pumpkin, and my sister-in-law actually asked me to come and help her work with her real estate business for a while. So I think I talked about that in my professional journey. And we had just purchased a new build in the country. I loved my kitchen out there. It was amazing. Loved it. Yeah, everything was going great. My oldest was in kindergarten. The next one was in preschool. So my Drew and I, we had our bonding time. It was terrific. And looking back, there were some things that I questioned about him as an infant. His head was not real steady when he was sitting up, when I was holding him upright. His eyes didn't always track evenly. And, his well baby checks, we talked about it, and every child develops differently. There were no alarming red flags that just screamed something is amiss. I was breastfeeding. He was doing fine with that. So, nothing. And then I will remember this day vividly. Stephanie was in kindergarten. Maddie and Drew and I, we were going to go to lunch with my granny. And I remember getting him dressed that morning, and he had what looked like a seizure. But it wasn't the shaky seizure. It was like his little legs popped up in the air, and he just stiffened up, arms and hands fisted, arms at a 45-degree, 90-degree angle, and just tensed up. And I thought, this is weird. This doesn't look normal. And so I called the pediatrician, told them what I described. They wanted to talk, the nurse wanted to talk to the pediatrician, and then they were going to call me back. Fine. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, something's not quite right. So we pack him up. Maddie and I head to town, and we're going to have lunch with our granny. We stopped at my mom's just for a minute to visit while we were waiting on my granny to get done. I can't remember what she was doing. But we were stopped at my mom's to visit with her and my dad for a few before we had to take off. And he did it again. And this time he did it so long and held his breath so long that he started to turn blue. I'm not waiting for the pediatrician to call me back at this point. I throw him in his pumpkin seat because I blew in his face. I rubbed his chest. I tickled the bottom of his feet. I couldn't get him out of this locked position. So I threw him in the pumpkin seat, and I hollered at my mom. I said, you're going to have to take me to the emergency room now. And so I sat in the front seat with him, and by then he'd come out of it, and now he was sleeping, and my mom was driving, and I did not know what was happening. I left my dad behind with my Maddie. They were going to hang out at the house. I get into the ER. It's the ER that I used to work at. So I had a little bit of credibility that I wasn't the freaked out mom who just randomly takes her kids to the emergency room. And they took us right back, which to me was alarming because I know you don't get brought back to the ER without having your weight. There's some level of urgency. So I heard postictal. I heard, the gaze is up and to the right, which I think is, yes, because when we think up and to your left. When you're thinking, when you're looking for words, the normal, quote, normal is you're going to think up, look up and to your left. That's the thinking look. Ironically, when I'm having conversations with you and I'm looking for words, when I don't look up and to the left, I just look out the window to the right. I don't know. Isn't that weird? There's something wrong with me. So anyway, his postictal was, his gaze was up and deviated to the right. He was very limp because he was tired. He'd done that whole tense thing. So they take him back. They're asking me questions. Nothing atypical, nothing unusual. His breastfed kid, what's he going to be allergic to? And they did some labs, drew some blood, and we're waiting for some results. And he does it again. It happens again. Now this time they're looking, they're witnessing it, and his heart rate elevates, and they get the O2 on him, which now I know it doesn't matter. If you're holding your breath, it doesn't do you any good to have oxygen flowing in your mouth or your nose, but whatever makes the healthcare professional feel better. So they observed it. And now it was time, okay, we need to do a CAT scan. We need to do a spinal tap. So I'm calling my husband. Did he have a cell phone? Yes, I'm sure he had a cell phone. He had a cell phone then. Isn't this terrible? This is just an assumed, right? Everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's got a cell phone now. I think he had a cell phone. But he wouldn't answer it. So I called his office phone. He wouldn't answer it. So I called the main office and I said, someone needs to let him know to call me. Something's happening with our son. I need him to call me. Because my husband worked 30 minutes away from home. 30 minutes south. So nothing came back on the spinal tap. Nothing came back in the blood work. Labs were all fine. The CT, the tech told me everything looked normal, right? I was thinking a mass, brain tumor. He's got a brain tumor. She said, the tech, she shouldn't have told me. I know this. She said she didn't see anything. So we're waiting to get the radiologist result and figure out what the hell is happening with my son. You guys, he's 6 months old. He's 6 months old. And one of the ER docs that I knew came over and told me, okay, here's the deal. Radiologist said it's this. It's lissencephaly. I've never heard of it. They hadn't heard of it. But they called my pediatrician's office. They called the house physician for recommendation. And he said, don't even waste your time. This is really rare. You just pack them up and you send them south to Riley in Indianapolis. Okay. That's, Riley's where you go when you have cancer. Riley's where you go when there's something really wrong. I'm letting my husband know. I think my husband arrived in the ER as we were packing up to head south. So then he was going to go get an overnight bag for he and I both and meet us down in the hospital at Riley. Thankfully, the pediatric neurologist on call, the amazing Dr. Hema Patel, I will forever love and adore this woman. She came in and just laid eyes on my boy and knew exactly what he had. And here is God's miraculous grace, you guys. When she did her residency, she studied under Dr. Ledbetter, who has been studying lissencephaly most of his adult career. What are the chances? If that is not a God thing, I don't know what is. So she knew exactly what she needed to do to treat him. We got him started on some phenobarb IV, and we're going to get him a loading dose to get him to the right level and maintain that. Did not sound like the end of the world to me, guys. We got a bed up in the pediatric unit. Wasn't the NICU, wasn't the PICU. It was a regular room. Got us a bed up there. And things were going okay. Yeah, it just went downhill from there. They did release us to home and told me to stop breastfeeding because he was aspirating at least half of what he was getting. Because breast milk is so much thinner than formula, and the human infant works through a certain age of infancy just on natural reflexes, right? The body just knows what to do. And as his body and brain started to mature and develop, things started to get sloppy. And so his epiglottis was really weak. And it didn't always, that's a muscle, it didn't always know. That muscle didn't always know and pay attention when it was time to block the airway when he was eating. And so when he was nursing, at least half of what he was bringing in was going into his lungs. And the only reason he wasn't sick with pneumonia for the first 6 months of his life is because I was breastfeeding him. Now, he was always on the skinny side, not like his sisters. They porked up. And he was always on the thinner side, but his dad was always a thinner person. So we just rationalized it. And he was never under the scales, right? No, none of his well baby checks had any concerns about his weight. And they said the only reason he wasn't sick with pneumonia was because I was breastfeeding him. And so his body was able to resolve having that breast milk in his lungs. It was just burning more calories. And so he wasn't sick because of it. If I had been formula feeding him, it might have been a different story. We might have caught it sooner. Wouldn't change the end game. So there's that. So they cut me off. I had to stop breastfeeding cold turkey, go to thickened formula, and really had to pay attention to his positioning while he was eating. And then they referred us to a developmental pediatrician. That's who we were going to follow up with. We were still going to have our pediatric neurologist and meet with her. And then we had to meet with a developmental pediatrician. I refer to her, I don't even know her name. She was the Grim Reaper. I think we went to see her maybe 3 or 4 days after our discharge. And she told us, here's your diagnosis. Your son has lissencephaly. You will be lucky to see him turn, you'll be lucky to see his 2nd to 4th birthday before he's gone. You will be in and out of the hospital regularly. He will be chronically ill. This is what you have to look forward to. So then we're driving home. What do you tell your kids? I've got a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. They're not going to understand that. Then I had to tell my parents. We had to tell his parents, my siblings, their siblings. It was basically a death sentence. Basically a death sentence. You're just going to watch your kid die. And not to belittle kids with cancer, but in my head, at least a cancer diagnosis, you had some hope. I was given no hope. How do you fix the brain when the brain didn't form the way it was supposed to in utero? How do you fix that? I can't do a brain transplant. It was awful. We then were introduced into a life of healthcare, special needs healthcare. And y'all, it is a whirlwind. Doctor's appointments, insurance, co-pays, deductible, surgeries, medications, therapy. We had occupational, physical therapy, developmental therapy. I had to quit my job to manage all of this stuff. And then, that sounds trite. It was a lot. I'm not going to bore you with all the details. But then life sets in. Life sets in and you figure out what day-to-day is going to look like. And, you guys in the beginning, I have to tell you this. So I thought a newborn and that feeding schedule, breastfeeding a newborn, was rough. I've done it 3 times. I knew it was rough. We had to place a feeding tube. We did a Nissen and a feeding tube placement. We were going to be aggressive in trying to keep this kid as healthy as we could. And so feeding was an issue. We were no longer going to introduce anything by mouth to risk pneumonia. So we did a Nissen and a feeding tube. And friends, while that healed, when that placement had to heal, that was traumatic for my husband and I, because he had to hold the kid, hold his arms and legs while I changed the dressing. And then I had to feed him every 2 hours. So you guys, a feeding tube feeding, it's work. It's not like you can just grab that kid and kind of cuddle up with him and let him breastfeed and you really don't do anything. You gotta unclamp the tube, pour the milk in without spilling the milk, then let it drain gravity fed into the Mickey button that's directly placed in his stomach, and then clamp it off and wait a few minutes for his little body to digest it, for his stomach to stretch out a little bit before you go back in another 5 minutes and pour another ounce or 2 in there. By the time you get done with the first feeding, you get maybe an hour of sleep before you gotta do it again. I was the walking dead for probably the first 3 months post-diagnosis. You didn't know what to talk about. You didn't know how to plan. We were fortunate that his phenobarb pretty much took care of his seizures. Pretty much. We had to crush up the pills, mix them in with his formula. We had to sign off on some experimental Athgard gel that I had to learn to give him. It was like Karo syrup in a syringe. And it had to stay cool, and I had to give it to him, I think, twice a day. So I had to learn how to do that. He got a wound infection in his chest, and they opened him up, and I had to do wet to dry dressings in my 6-month-old's open chest wound. So we're doing the 3 therapies. I'm learning how to read his behaviors and his signals. Learning how to answer questions from our daughters and doing our very best not to make them feel like they're not getting the attention that they need and deserve from us. We realized the importance of having family nearby to support us. We could not have done this alone. So it was really important to have family nearby. Almost every doctor's visit with both the developmental peds and the pediatric neurologist routinely warned us, be careful in your marriage. Any marriage is work. A marriage with a special needs kids is even more tenuous because you tend to focus on the kid, and there's already a 50% divorce rate. Double that. I don't know how you double if it's not 100%, but the rate of divorce in families with a special need kid is elevated. And I get it. I see why. So we were warned, and I thank those people down at Riley who warned us about that to pay attention to. Now, that's not to say we both did our part and it was all sunshine and rainbows between my husband and I. We had our ups and downs, just like anybody. There were good times and bad. My husband was an amazing father to all of our kids. Amazing. And I know it was hard for him. We all had to go through our own grieving process about how to let go of the hopes and the dreams that we had in our minds for this little one. They're gone. And we all, my husband, myself, my family, we all had to figure out how to let that go. And it was a grieving process. And like, I can't remember who told me this, but grieving comes in waves, right? You think you're good, and then another wave comes crashing in and knocks you on your butt because you don't realize the significance of the loss until something else hits you. It never dawned on me that I would never hear this precious little boy say, "Mommy." I would never hear him speak to us. This is a kid who was never going to get to play catch or ball with his dad. His dad was never going to get to take him go fishing. You guys, he would have been 20 years old this year. And I'm still ugly crying about it from time to time. So, here's the silver lining. The good news is, my Drew was a miracle. He was a miracle in so many ways. We went seizure-free from the time we got his phenobarb to a therapeutic level fairly quickly after diagnosis until he was almost 3. We were freaking fortunate. He was almost 3.5 when seizures started again. We started on phenobarb again, and it was ironic. It was interesting because at the time he was diagnosed, there were about, 1,000, 1,200 known cases of lissencephaly around the globe. There were other cases of lissencephaly itself, but those cases also came with many other birth defects. His was just the smooth brain. He had nothing else wrong with him. His genetic screen came back fine. It was just an anomaly in where those neurons moved in the first trimester of his development. So a lot of these kids were on their 3rd and 4th and 5th medication combination to try and manage seizures. So by the time we went back, we were able to start with phenobarb, and phenobarb worked for several years. Then we incorporated another medication. And I want to say by the time, so at that point, let me back up. When we had to start back on seizure meds, we learned that seizures were going to be a part of our lives. That was just part of it. So a typical day of seizure activity, and my girls, everyone in my family knew how to track it, and they knew they needed to track it. So we had a calendar. It was Drew's seizure calendar. You logged the time it started and how long it lasted. Everybody contributed to it. So a typical day was 4 to 6 seizures, maybe 30 seconds. And I learned that you can have infantile spasms, which were the jackknife look that he had when he was first diagnosed. You can have a grand mal seizure, where it's the whole body trembling. You can have a staring seizure, where you just zone out. He's even had laughing seizures. I kid you not. I described them. My pediatrician actually saw them, and it was a seizure that tickled his brain and made him laugh. And it was one of the only times I remember hearing him laugh. So there are a variety of seizures. We learned that we were just going to live with seizures, and we managed that. As he grew and got bigger and dosages started to reach their max for his weight, we did look into it was called a vagal stimulator. It's like a pacemaker. No, it's like a defibrillator. Defibrillators for your heart. This is like a defibrillator for your brain. And I know they've used it, somebody told me they use it also for like bipolar or depression even. One of the pediatric surgeons, our pediatric neurologist, referred us to her. She's amazing. A little pipsqueak thing. It's just a little implant on the chest. They feed the lead wire up the vagal nerve. and we work with the pediatric neurologist to set it. It'll either trigger you can time it. She's got this little remote control thing where she can program it, or they give us this really powerful magnet that if he's having a seizure, I can just swipe it and it will trigger the impulse. And that sends an electrical impulse in the brain and kind of resets that misfire that's happening. I can't remember how old he was when we got that, but that bought us time so that we didn't have to worry about what's our next preventative measure for managing seizures. Friends, that was $105,000. Thank the Lord for Purdue's insurance, because I think we paid $250 out of pocket for that. And it was an outpatient procedure to boot. Amazing. Sadly, we only got about 3 years worth, maybe 3 years out of it before he passed away. And I felt terrible that we couldn't donate it to somebody else who couldn't afford it, who didn't have insurance. That was very sad to me. Very sad to me. But I was so thankful for it when we had it. So thankful. So some of the things that I'm thankful for, in addition to the great insurance that we had, were the lessons that my Drew taught us that I could have never taught my kids. He taught my daughters compassion and empathy and patience. And it was so at the very core of who they are as women today. I could have never taught them that, you guys. They are now the first ones. Growing up, they were the first ones to reach out to that person in their elementary and high school and college. They were the first ones to reach out to that person who's being ostracized, to that person who is walking funny or talking funny. They're so compassionate to folks with disabilities, seen and unseen. And I am so thankful for that, because I could never have taught them to be that graceful. Never. So I didn't go into all the deets that I wanted to about the day we lost him and the funeral and that, and maybe for another time. This was long enough. I just wanted to share a little bit about the amazing person that I was blessed to share a part in his life with you all. So, hugs to any of you moms who have lost a little. I know it's hard. You always carry a piece of them. What was I saw a post. There were a couple moms that were in some support groups with me that lost their kiddos before I did, and they're amazing women. The Parker Lee Project, I'll put her contacts out there. So if you're interested in making a difference, this woman is amazing. She has created a nonprofit in her daughter's name, and she collects this. I sent stuff to her. She collects things like wheelchairs, car seats, feeding supplies, medical equipment from moms like me that have lost their littles and you don't know what to do with the stuff. I donated it to her, and now she repurposes this stuff for families that don't have insurance or waiting for insurance approval. It's amazing. What's her name? Megan. Megan is an amazing woman. And so I'm going to put the Parker Lee Project, I'm going to put their link on here. If you're interested in donating, thank you. You could also, if you're an Amazon shopper, you can go to Amazon Smiles and select them as a nonprofit. So every purchase you make sends support to the Parker Lee Project just by shopping. I do it. Do it. I would appreciate it. And if you do it, tell me. Send me a message, tag me on Facebook, and let me know that you're using Amazon Smile for the Parker Lee Project. I would love that. Thank you so much for taking time to visit with me today. I really appreciate it. I'm so thankful for all of you that are willing to take some time and hang out with me. I hope I can make a difference in your journey with your kiddo. And as always, I look forward to talking to you next week. All right, you guys, take care.